Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education by Kate Colbert and Joe Salustio with contributions by Elvin Freites is now available for pre-order on Amazon. Get your Kindle edition or your softbound book. It's going to be
amazing.
If you're someone who's passionate about transforming education, which you are if you're listening to this podcast, you should check out the Charles Koch Foundation. The Charles Koch Foundation supports social entrepreneurs and organizations that are embracing innovation to build better solutions for today's learners. Visit ckf.org to learn more. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where, you know what I'm going to say, where we make education your business. And we've done that over 500 times. And I keep saying that because it's pretty darn incredible that I get to say that. Almost 3 years, coming up this coming January 2023, we'll be 3 years old here at the EdUp Experience. By then, we'll have a book out. We'll have, I don't know, probably like 600 episodes at least. Elvin Freites, of course, co-founder of the EdUp Experience, keeps me busy. I'm booked all the way out to the middle of February at this point, every single day at my lunch. I call it a eat while podcasting. That's my new gig, eat while podcasting. And so if you, I've got a guest host today and a guest, and if they see me like this right behind the microphone, they can see me right now. My cheeks are moving, but I'm not saying anything. It's because I've taken a bite of something off camera. But that's the way it's got to go, because there's just no way this conversation will ever stop. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get right into it with my special, and I mean special, guest co-host. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been trying to get him back. It didn't work out, and then we rescheduled with this guest a couple times. Blah, blah, blah. We went back and forth, but we finally got him. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen.
Come on, put your hands up in the air.
For Bob Brown, he's president of the University of West Los Angeles. Bob, welcome back.
Hey, Joe. Thanks. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me back. Hi, Earl. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Pleasure to meet you, and I'm really excited about this.
You know what I love about
conversation,
podcasting?
as I'm always excited about it.
Well, we got a little delay there, Earl. I think we got a little delay on you.
Yeah, I'm just excited to be here. Thank you.
No worries. What I love, Earl, and you'll know this because I haven't introduced you yet. When I bring on a first-time guest co-host, they always make a mistake right at the beginning, because and Bob did that right away. I was like, Bob, don't make any mistakes and tell everybody who my guest is before I introduce him. But he did, so I'm going to bring you in now, ladies and gentlemen.
Stamp your feet on the ground now.
For my guest, Earl Buford. He's president of the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, better known as, say it for me, is it an acronym that you say out loud, or you always say it all spelled out?
It's CALE. Welcome.
CALE. There we go. Not the one you eat, but the one you might want to know about work, if you're going to work. Earl, welcome to the podcast. We got off to a rocky start, but that's what we do here at the EdUp Experience. We like to liken this podcast more to a train wreck than a polished experience. So that's what makes it fun. How are you today? How things going?
Great. Again, really excited to be here. Excited to, anytime I get a chance to talk to the general public about, education and becoming their business is, right. That's right where I want to be at, and that's where CALE wants to be.
Well, I'm glad you used
my hotel in Minneapolis.
Nice. Well, let's start. Let's level set. What is CALE? What do you guys do, and how do you do it?
Well, and nice part about the name is, Council of Adult and Experiential Learning. It shows right there that we, for 48 years, have been a beacon of a partner working with mostly higher institutions on behalf of adult learners, workers, students returning. That's been our bread and butter. We've also been probably the leading voice, one of the leading voices in the country on credit for prior learning and how that can benefit adult learners, but also benefit systems moving forward. We do a lot of things too, but that's really what we've been known for nearly 48 years. And of course, our yearly conference, which I'll plug later.
Yeah, so you plug that as many times as you want.
Okay.
Well, I was, Bob told me when he came on, this is payback for messing up my intro. He said he was going to ask you all sorts of questions about credit for prior learning. I'm going to ask him instead, so he has nothing left to ask. No, I won't do that to you, Bob. I won't do that to you. But before I do bring you in, Bob, I do want to ask you, Earl, real fast. The adult learner has evolved over the last, I don't know, you can put a number of years on it, but more savvy consumeristic tendencies, much more debt conscious, very aware of choice, friction averse to friction, want things to be easy and fast because there's two kids, and I'm using this as a personal example.
Yep.
Two kids hanging on your legs when you're trying to do your homework. And, there's a lot about the adult student that's changed, and everybody wants to work and everybody has ins and outs as the adult student, which means that as an institution supporting the adult student, you've had to evolve too. Would that be correct?
Correct. It's interesting. When we talk to our members, especially the presidents of universities and institutions, and obviously the goal is to get students to come back, return, and butts in the seats, euphemism, if you will. What's also interesting is the amount of students that have dropped out for all the reasons you mentioned, but also dropped out because the market's so hot that they can make money now. And so, I'd love to talk about that more, because I don't think we're accounting for that as much. That they're not dropping out because of those things you referenced, but also dropping out because the demand is so high that they can make great money over the next year or two, then come back to school. So exactly. So that's a phenomenon that I don't think anyone anticipated, but it's a real scenario that has to be dealt with and discussed and planned and strategized around.
Bob, over to you.
Thank you, Joe. Earl, I'm an attorney, as you know, so I'm going to swear you in and put you on the witness stand and ask you some hopefully probative questions that our listeners are really interested in hearing your reaction to, okay? And the first one is, there's a big challenge to the acceptance of adult experiential learning credit. How is that bias unfair to individuals, and how do you overcome it? What explanations do you provide to employers and educational institutions on why it should be employed and better received?
Yeah, no, great question. I'll start from the academic institution side. While it has spread over the years, there's still a number of institutions that are not utilizing it for a variety of reasons. The biggest reason we often hear through surveys and through conversation is, it takes away from the bottom line. But we've done some pretty major research study with WICHE, WICHE, and in that study, it basically showed that for institutions that prominently use credit for prior learning, there's a nearly 20% increase in their retention and completion, because now they're focused on their schooling, walking in with 10, 15 credits, whatever the number is, and then they're able to focus on the study or the economic mobility items that are going to affect their career. So that number should be higher and will get higher, but that's a pretty amazing stat right there. Flip side of that, have a number of employers that just weren't aware in the definition of what credit for prior learning is, but they've thought about and utilized it from an upskill and reskilling standpoint. And so more and more employers are demanding that this happens within their own organization and companies, and or that their education institutions in their regions are collaborating with them, articulating that, if you will. So it's a growing phenomenon. It makes sense. It helps workers and learners, but it also can help employers and institutions. And ultimately, the systems connection is what it's all about.
Bob, let me just ask a quick follow-up. So earlier you're saying that the employer says, hey, look, we've given Joe over here training in X, Y, and Z, and if you don't give him this 6 credits, we're going to send Joe somewhere else. And we have the power here?
I didn't say that directly, but that's what in essence,
I think I might have said it directly.
In essence, what can happen, and it has happened in some scenarios. So in that case, that's where KL as a partner or honest broker can help those systems work together to achieve that. And we've done that with some pretty major companies across the country and regionally.
Interesting. Bob, I'm sorry about that.
No problem. Earl, structurally, tell us a little bit more. Define what is this credit for prior learning? How does that work? I know you have an assessment tool for it. Talk a little bit about how it works and how it's defined.
Well, and the beauty of it is just as the title is, it's taken past academic prowess and also your work experiences, and there's a formula we utilize that says, so based on these experiences, that there's a certain amount of credit attached to that, and so you can walk back into an institution of higher learning with these credits in your pocket that says, to my point earlier, okay, I have 10 credits. I'm going to go back to my community college and work towards my AA in this chosen field because I know the demand is there, or I've worked for this company in the past, or I've worked for them presently, and so I want to move into from an entry level side of the work to middle management, and so I need this to move forward. So that's where this prowess comes into play. That's where support from the employer as well and the institution do that. So that's one. We've also at our conference last November, we did roll out an updated version called Credit Predictor Pro. That's really more, it's a streamlined assessment, even quicker, faster, better aligned than in our previous work. And so right now we've used most this year to try it out, test it out with our members. And I forgot to mention earlier, Hale is also membership organizations. We have about over 3,000 individual members, about 600 plus higher ed institutions, and a growing number of workforce systems, chambers, and employers. So again, all those systems we talk about are all connected here. And so this Credit Predictor Pro has been tested throughout this year by many of those members, and then also other new clients that have come onto the scene.
You got more in there, Bob?
Well, again, I just wanted to get a little bit more granular, Earl. Exactly how does it work? How does it correlate? How do you correlate work experience to credit for higher education?
Yeah, and Bob, I'm sorry if I didn't answer it as direct. It's hard to, it varies, and so just know that. So I'll use concrete example. Let's say, banking company A, you're working there as a teller, and let me back up. I'll give you an even better scenario on that. So we're in partnership with some major banking programs across the country in a major project we're doing with Truist Bank and their foundation. So there's an entry-level credential that's gained that is already articulated with local banks. So, and in some markets, you walk in with 5 credits attached to that credential. That's one, okay? So 2, you start working for said bank, and let's say 6 months to a year down the road, okay, well, I have these 5 credits in my pocket. I have now 6 months to a year of experience. Maybe that equates to another 3 credits, okay? So now I have 8 credits. Now I want to go pursue my AA or my BA in finance. I now know I can go, I have a focus of finance. I have 8 credits in my pocket based on this whole process. I know I'm going to need 120 to graduate with the BA in finance. Again, it varies, but you get the point. So you're now only 112 credits away from your finance degree.
One of the phenomenon, it's interesting, and I would say interesting, by the way, I've noticed that about myself. But you can make PLA work. You can make credit for prior learning work if you want to. If you want to do it, you can align this experience with the outcomes of this class. You also can look at this experience and the outcomes of this class and go, I don't know. I mean, does it fit? Doesn't it fit? No, I don't think it does fit. It's really easy to say that. It's really easy to go, no, I don't think it fits. And, the student's got to retake this class. The adult student says, hell no, I am not doing that again. I'm going to go over to this institution who said they're going to give me this assessment, and they're going to give it to me in less than 48 hours. And I'm not going to be sitting on my, waiting around, right? Yeah. There is a real human component to this on desire. Yeah. You desire to do these credit evaluations and take the credit or not. And many times in higher ed, the answer is not, because we either want you to take these classes because there's revenue generation for us. We don't want to take your credit. We want you to take the classes, or it's hard, can't make it fit, I'm too rigid, right? I mean, that is the story of higher ed and PLA and credit transfer.
And 2 things, Joe, you've seamlessly you use the terms interchangeably, and that happens quite often. So prior learning assessment and credit prior learning are the same thing. So just so the audience knows that. It's funny, before I came to Cale and I was more involved in association management and workforce world, PLA meant something completely different in the world of construction, project labor agreement. So it's so I was gonna get a good laugh.
We do have an attorney here, just in case you have any labor agreement questions.
But the other thing I was going to mention,
I sustain the objection.
Yeah. So I've had a number of our member presidents through our surveying, but also just in conversation, say to me, yes, we want to get students back. We want to retain them so they graduate. But we're also thinking about the economic goals of our students now, because if we don't think about that and make sure they graduate and have a job lined up, then we're doing disservice, or two, they're not going to want to come to our institution because we're not focused on their goals, the same goals that they have as an individual. So I was really just amazed. It's been amazing to see and hear that from such a large range of presidents. And so some of our system connect work between workforce and higher ed and employer engagement is built around that premise right there, that we're going to help the students, help the adult learners think about their economic goals and what line. Also with the employers saying we can't find this, we can't find that. Well, we know that the talent is there. We know the talent is at these institutions. Let's get together and work on these, from assessment to articulation to employment.
Too many learners are being left behind by the current one-size-fits-all model of education. We here at EdUp and our friends at the Charles Koch Foundation see a better path forward. The Charles Koch Foundation supports innovators in education who are building and scaling new pathways to allow all learners to discover their potential. By changing the way we think about education, we can unlock opportunities for millions more Americans. To learn more about the Charles Koch Foundation support of individualized education, visit ckf.org.
Earl, I wish you had been pressing this concept a lot earlier, like when I was going to school. I grew up in the poor kid in South Central LA, and I had to work, my way through my undergraduate school. It's kind of ironic because I was the night manager at a grocery market at a very early age. I started managing a grocery market at 19 years old, believe it or not. I had people working for me who were older than I was. But, I was very fortunate. I graduated with a degree in finance from a major public institution and also a law degree from a major ABA accredited law school. And the hardest part of my education was actually getting my general education requirements, because I just didn't have the focus.
Yep.
And I tell you that story because I'm sure that at times you get the argument from higher education institutions, well, by accepting this prior learning, we're going to have to supplant or replace some other general education requirements, and therefore the individual won't have as rounded an education. What do you say to that?
Well, there's so many stories like yours in the past, present, and will be in the future. What can we do to minimize that scenario? Again, the systems work we talked about, more roadmap, not just career concepts, but more roadmaps that are easy to follow for folks. Like, think about your scenario. That great work you're doing, you weren't sure where to go from there. So that shouldn't be that. We need to make this easier I don't mean easier, but easier to understand, easier to follow, easier to grow. I coined this phrase, path to pathways. I always talk about having pathways for students or workers, but we never identify what the path to those pathways are. So that's a lot of our conversations and work around that. Plus, this is personal for me. I grew up in a scenario that resembled why we do this work. So I'm the product of a high school pregnancy. That was a success story. My parents married right thereafter, but they went two different directions as adult learners. My mother eventually went back to school, became a teacher, and retired from that. Still volunteering to this day. And my father was probably the quintessential workforce education example in this country. Bounced around job from job, didn't have a roadmap. Luckily, went through a job training program that was directly connected to a major employer. And he retired from that major employer, General Motors, 30 plus years later. Changed our lives forever. We always say we won the workforce lottery there. But the other piece of that is once he walked into that employer, he took advantage of all of the upskilling education opportunities to progress with that company.
Level up.
Yep, multiple credentials, AA, everything you can do to move forward. He did it, but that rocky start, pregnancy to not sure what a roadmap is and not having the grades to get into an institution right away, he could have been, the stat we often hear about and read about. That's why it's so personal to me, to make sure that we do this work, we do it well on behalf of all these players.
I noticed your passion. I looked on your website and heard a little bit about you, read a little bit about you, Earl. You have a very fascinating beginning, and I can really tell that you have a passion for what we're trying to do. And in particular, for many first generational learnlearners and people who are entering into higher education, this is so critical because the time is so valuable, and the money plays such an important role in how they progress through their education. So this is really important stuff.
Well, Bob, and thank you for sharing your story too. I mean, it's good for the audience listeners to hear these truths that are happening to individuals I think are pretty successful at this point in time, but the road wasn't easy. The road wasn't laid out. It wasn't paved. But these institutions and systems have to think about that, and many of them are. And so that's why our membership membership are so deep and wide, because we're having these conversations and these healthy conversations about their students and their.
Earl, let me jump in and
ask
this kind of flywheel based question. I promise I'll get there eventually, but it might take me a second. like everything else, it takes me a long time to get there. You prior learning assessment's a funny thing, right? Because although it's something that's emerging and people are getting good at it, it's kind of let's go back to your dad who works 30 years plus at General Motors, you said, right? Or GE, did you say General Motors? So my grandfather, another example.
General Motors company, yeah.
Yeah, he worked for 30-something years at AT&T. That doesn't happen anymore, that somebody does 30 plus years in the same organization. So there's these examples that we have, dads and grandfathers and mothers. And my grandmother's another example. She worked in the same high school for like the same amount of time, 30 years as a secretary. It's like nobody does that anymore. And so we have adult learners moving from job to job, advancing sometimes because, you look at all of the factors that create this movement. Add the fact that nobody stays in the same place to the fact that we have 39 million some college no degree students out there. Is it because we failed in prior learning when we needed to be good at it that it created 39 million? Right? Like, was this part of the problem that we weren't really good at saying, hey, look, the best example I always say is you're a medic in the military and you want to become a medical assistant in the civilian world. It feels like that should be something that would have a clear pathway, right? But because we as higher education didn't look at these adult learners early enough and say, yes, we'll take those credits. These people, did they just stay out of college and now we've created this problem? Maybe it wasn't the catalyst for creating the problem of some college and no degree, but somewhere along the line, there was a failure within higher education to help a very large group of students that now everybody's trying to attract. And how do we have to attract them back? Through credit for prior learning, because so many of them have some college no degree. What do you say to all that?
Yeah, two things. Another personal example. So I ran a workforce association for 15 years, and then I left there I ran 2 workforce boards in different regions across the country before coming to Cale. So I think each move made sense for me personally. But the funny part is my mother thinks I can't keep a job.
Well, how dare you move after 10 years to a new job?
Yeah. So, but back to your early example, it's just different. But again, I harken back to that roadmap. For me, using that example I just gave, there was no plan. I'm kind of a passionate person about the work. So whatever place I've had the pleasure of leading, it's built around is the mission right, and what kind of impact will it have, especially on systems institutions. So I say all that back to your larger question. It's so much more work to be done, and so the passion for me now is what I said earlier, but also the passion is how to get more of our great higher ed institutions and partners to start to think about how to utilize this, how to help us improve some of the technology we're creating with them. That's what's driving us right now. The reason I was late joining you is I was in a budget platform meeting with my parent company and some other providers about how to modernize the platforms we're already creating for our entire partners. So it's always trying to tinker with improving it, and also how to do the career awareness roadmap piece come into all that for our learners.
Love it. Bob, you want to get in the last
Joe,
couple of
thank
questions?
you. Yeah, Earl. Do employers and higher educational institutions recognize the value of attracting these adult learners back into higher education? You know, there's a diversity of thought process that actually working brings to the environment, to the learning environment. You know, a lot of young people who have the good fortune of going directly to college through the more traditional paths, they don't have the opportunity to learn, get the experience and learn the experience. But by coming into contact and association with people who do, it also helps to diversify their educational experience and improve their learning environment. I would suspect. What do your research show on that? And am I accurate, or this time I'm off the witness stand?
No, no, you're spot on. It's our research, our conversations, our surveying have all borne out what you just said. And what's also starting another phenomenon, especially coming out of the pandemic, is there are individuals who went the traditional route. Let's say they got their AA or their BA, and started working for a big company or industry, and took, instead of going straight to get their post-secondary, their postgraduate work, and they stopped to work, which makes sense. But now they are like, all right, do I pursue my master's, or do I start to, based on the roadmap that's been created, and do I go back and go to a community college or tech college and pick up key credentials to support the work I'm already doing? Like, that's been really starting to pick up, especially coming out of the pandemic. I mentioned earlier on the onset that some folks are dropping out to go to work and make great money right away because the demand is so high. So you got all these different journeys happening, and so we have to stay on top of all of these trends. So we research our innovation evaluation work, and then of course just hearing from our members, what trends are they seeing, like the ones I just described. All that we have to keep track of all of that, because it all adds up to this great talent pool from a economic development and employer perspective, to what are the numbers of students who needed in these institutions to create this talent attraction, talent connection strategy as well. So again, I always come back to, if no matter how much one of the stakeholders do around this, it's always going to stop short of true scale without the other partners or systems. So that's why I'm so keyed on making sure that we're an honest broker in those conversations, and those as they move forward, and also making sure our students benefit from it.
I love that. Well, we like to move to the end of our episodes here with the final 2 questions that we ask of every person. In this case, Earl, I know you have an event coming up, so I know you want to talk about that. So here's the question. What do you want to say about Kale that we haven't talked about? So I was just reminding you that you wanted to talk about that, by the way. So what do you want to say about Kale that's coming up? Anything you have going on, speaking engagements you have, anything that we didn't talk about? Because Bob was supposed to ask you a bunch of really, really good questions, but he stole all my good ones. So
I have a
what did he
treat
forget to ask you?
I think you hit on one trend that's really exciting for me is our ability to work with key populations, whether it's minority serving institutions, HBCUs, native serving institutions. That work has really grown for Latino adult student success. Is a big project of ours. So I'm always happy to highlight that. While it's all around the key themes. That said, I have a special treat for your listeners. So November 16th through the 18th is the annual Kale Conference, this year in Chicago at the Palmer House. And then each year it's in different markets. Special treat, while our deadline has passed, if you want to attend, go in and register. Use the discount code, all in capital letters, special.
Attention.
Yes, SPECIAL. Deadline is passed, but for great listeners of this podcast, please go and register. And it's on our website, gale.org, and register and use that discount. And we'd love to see you in Chicago, balmy Chicago, November 16th through 18th.
It'll be nice and warm. It's 78 degrees or so.
I'm
right?
from Wisconsin, so I can handle it.
Awesome.
I'm from California. I can't handle it.
Yeah, Bob got cold just listening to you speak.
Yeah, but I will say that we joined University of West Los Angeles, joining Kale.
Yes,
Proud
member.
Really excited about your programs. I wish we had a little bit more time because I want to talk. I would love to talk to you about your partnerships and developing the partnerships with employers. And our university is actually doing that right now. We've got 3 programs that are in the works with major employers. And as a matter of fact, they asked about the credit for prior learning, and we haven't fully incorporated it yet. But once I was introduced to you, I'm very excited about perhaps spending some time with you and learning more about how we can incorporate that into the University of West LA.
Well, I have a suggestion, Bob. One, invite me out to Los Angeles anytime, especially in November, December, or January. And I recently had a conversation with Greg Irish, who runs the LA Area Workforce Board, and I think he has a budget of about $200 million. So I said, well, we should connect you to some of our higher ed partners in the region. So
I can't wait. As a matter of fact, the phone you hear ringing in the background is probably me.
A good attorney can multitask. That's what we do know. Well, I'll tell you what, one of the greatest things about this podcast has been making great connections for people. So hopefully that goes on. And Earl, we do want to ask you the final question, which is, what do you see as the future of higher education? I think I might know your answer. Yeah,
I think it's bright. No matter what the pundits say, the forecasters say, it's more important than ever. And although I've come from a workforce background, I've always in personal espoused the benefits of getting education, getting educated, getting your degrees, and moving on into your own and make sure it fits your economic goals. So I feel really, really, really excited about the future of higher education and where it can go and where it's going.
You know what? Good for you, man. I love that. I love people that come on and say future of higher education is bright, because there aren't too many, and it's really easy to be negative, and it's a lot harder to innovate and tackle the problems that we're having. So I appreciate that and appreciate your answer.
I couldn't agree with you more, Earl. I think you're spot on, buddy.
Thank you.
Well, you guys, this has been a treat for me, to have 2 energetic gentlemen on with me. I got a little bit of a sore throat today. I was like, oh gosh, some days I'm like, oh, another podcast. And then I saw these 2 together and I said, I'm going to crush this podcast. We have to. It's just an important issue. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you both.
Hey,
for
Joe,
coming
thank
on.
you. Thank you for having me. And Earl, it's really been delightful to meet you. Let me give you my cell number, okay?
Okay.
Are you going to say it over the air here, Bob?
No.
Okay. If you want to give your cell phone out, we'll send it out. We'll put it in the show notes and tell everybody to call you for legal advice.
On second thought.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, my guest co-host today, first time, he was a guest, now he's a first-time guest co-host. He is Bob Browning. He's president of the University of West Los Angeles, and he's out there enjoying the sunshine. Bob, thanks for being on.
I am indeed, Joe, and thank you for having me. And Earl, it was a pleasure talking with you. Keep up the good work, my friend.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work, okay?
Yeah.
And of course, my guest today, Earl Buford. He's president of the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, one of the most important people in higher education today, in my opinion, in the work that he's doing. Earl, did you have a good EdUp experience today?
I had a fantastic, and I look forward to being invited back.
Oh, there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd. The purpose of education is to help learners discover their aptitudes and interests, develop their skills, and then deploy that knowledge to benefit themselves and others. The Charles Koch Foundation, a nonprofit grant-making organization, works with leaders in education to remove barriers that stand in the way of all learners reaching their potential. They support individualized and flexible models that improve access and quality for millions of Americans. They also support apprenticeship and upskilling programs that connect learners to in-demand jobs that match their skills and interests. The foundation is looking for new partners to challenge the status quo and transform the post-secondary education system. Learn more about their partnership opportunities and apply for a grant at ckf.org. You can also find them on Twitter at C. Koch Foundation and LinkedIn by searching Charles Koch Foundation.